Here we are.
Here we are. Yeah, so how is your morning? How's it?
Good. Everything is good. It's like holidays. This is kind of like the last thing I'll be doing before I kind of wind the studio down for a few days. Being from Ireland, most of the people I work with are, they get like crazy 2-week European vacations over there. So
Wow.
I'm looking forward to having some downtime where I can write, catch up on some writing, and spend some time with the hubby and the dog.
What do you
Yeah,
write?
how about you?
What am I doing? I am having a whole bunch of freelance work. So I'm basically working like every day. Which I'm very grateful for because I definitely need the money. But yeah,
Yeah,
we do freelance work. I'm working on my James Baldwin script about the look-alike competition. I'm working on that.
that sounds amazing. I haven't heard anything from you about that yet.
Yeah. So essentially it's like a rom-com about these two people who participate in a James Baldwin look-alike competition and fall in love. So I actually started writing it before all these like look-alike competitions happened because there's an Ernest Hemingway look-alike competition in Key West, Florida.
I had no idea. All these crazy things, it's like reminds me of, the James Baldwin thing sounds amazing. I can't wait to see that. Um, but it reminds me of the Miss Subways thing in Never Stop the Action as well. Um, like when you do a little bit of research, there's a lot of people out there really dedicated to some very specific things.
Yeah. What was your research process like for that? Because you talked about like singularity and all this other science stuff that I honestly very vaguely understand.
So yeah, Never Stop the Action, the film that we're mostly talking about today, it kind of came together as like a mishmash of lots of different ideas. I was thinking about quantum physics. I'm not a PhD in physics or anything like that. I'm more interested in how ideas from science can get mapped into art, and into storytelling. So yeah, the process for that film was like I knew I wanted to make some kind of quite fragmented film where we would jump around in timelines, taking this idea of like multiple universes and multiplicities of perspectives on things and how that mapped into queerness. Because I think there's like some really interesting ideas about how queerness is a real, like a quantum existence in a way, where we're constantly occupying multiple states of being at the same time and we're looking at ourselves from multiple positions simultaneously. We can be like a particle and a wave. I think there was like a lot of really interesting ideas there of ways to talk about queerness and to talk about politics and to talk about history and talk about friendship. And that's all kind of wrapped up into the film. But the process itself, I started with the idea of quantum physics and it kind of went from there. The train idea didn't come in until later. The train came in when I had all these kind of seemingly random thoughts that I knew were connected. When I was like, how is an audience going to stand this? It's just going to look like a bunch of TikTok videos, So the idea was that the train with our two main characters, they would basically be the people who hold our hands through the film. And the film I'd made previously, The Red Tree, has a narrator that takes us through the film and allows us to jump through multiple timelines, and I felt that that was quite a successful formal device with The Red Tree. So I was interested in trying to develop that further with Never Stop the Action.
Yeah, so that's something I'm really curious about. So it's like you're taking this device that you use well in like a documentary and then you're using it in a narrative as well. So like are these sort of like genre conventions really like a mess for you or like they're not? Yeah, like how do you see genre in films? Yeah.
I don't really. And I think that, I even had this issue the other day. I'm like on Film Freeway and, some trying to apply for film festivals and there's all these drop down boxes. What kind of film is it? And what have you got in Never Stop the Action? It's experimental, it's comedy, it's drama, it's history, it's politics, it's queer. There's like tons of different things, but you're only ever allowed to pick one, maybe two. So yeah, getting into discussions about genre, I think, is more of a market thing. Like as creative people, I don't think that we necessarily come up with a genre first and then decide what the idea is going to be. I mean, some people do, but that's not the way my head works. I start with a crazy idea and then add more and more ideas to it, and at a certain point, it starts to take a shape. And with this film, the idea was building on the type of work I've done in the past, working with actors more, because a lot of my previous work had been documentary, and seeing what that was going to lead.
So I know that like in the beginning you were doing that you began with like photography and more visual art. Like, so this is kind of a big question, but do you feel like the art world or the film world is more evil? Like which one is easy, which one is feels better to exist in if you had to choose?
I don't know. It's really hard, right? Because there's obviously amazing people operating in both of those worlds. And um, it's funny because for me, I started off, like you say, more in the art world doing video installations. And it was only later that when I started making long form feature length works, that I couldn't really show those in the art world anymore. And I found the two audiences were very distinctly different as well, that people in the two worlds were not always all that familiar with what people were doing. So I thought that was unexpected and a little strange. But um I don't know. I mean, I think that creativity is amazing and community is amazing. And I think capitalism is the problem, where everything that is valued is commodified. And, I mean, I'd probably sound like a broken record. We've heard about this stuff for, all my life anyway, people complaining about this kind of economic system that we live under. But what it is with film is that, you're in a peculiar relationship to because your creativity demands money, right? It's like making films just like sucks money up, so how do you negotiate that? It's like, but like it's when you were showing your work at Brooklyn Filmmakers Collective recently, and I think one of the things I said was you're showing your rough cut. I was like, you just put this dude in front of a sheet, and that was so great. And it's like, literally, there was a guy talking in front of a sheet that was hanging on a clothesline or something. It was like, this is great cinema. So I think there's something really exciting about that for me, and that's, I think, with Never Stop the Action, why it was really exciting. Just get on the train with the actors and, for the audience, we can go anywhere with this film. Some of the footage in that film I shot like 20 years ago. There's footage of a friend of mine who passed away 20 years ago, you know.
At the end, yeah, yeah. What was that? What was I was gonna ask? Was that a true story with
Yeah,
Lip?
yeah.
You
Yeah.
told that more too. Just yeah.
So yeah, the film starts off with these two characters. They're like two friends who have been kind of like ride or die for ages, but then we find out that Teshi has been in this relationship and maybe it wasn't a great relationship. And consequently, she and her pal Casey have not been hanging out. So they're coming back from this party where they're properly reconnected. She's managed to get herself out of this relationship and they've reconnected as mates. So it's all like fun and games at the start, and they're playing these games, to kind of keep them occupied as they go on their journey. But the further they go along, the more things start to kind of open up for them, and it's like a thing when you spend a lot of time with a really good friend, like if you go on a road trip or you go, or you literally like you're sat at some like after party and and you're just talking it up, it's like everything starts to come out and there's no more filters and you know so for me, with the characters, we wanted them to get to a point where those kind of usual barriers that you have about saying things that are traumatic or saying things that you don't really want to say, those barriers go away. So each of them shares like a kind of a childhood memory about traumas that each of them experienced. And then that then leads to Casey um, saying to Teshi, I've never told you this. And it's the first time he's actually spoken to um, this friend of his about another friend that he lost many years before. Um, the footage is all from the 90s. It's all shot on high-end cameras. And and it's about a friend of mine that I lost. But that person in the film is a stand-in. I mean, we've all lost people. So that moment is really about paying homage to the people that we love that are not with us anymore. But also that point where you start the grieving process, where you kind of you say something out, like it's like coming out, it's like you're coming out about your grief, it's like as queer people, we have to come out all the time, relentlessly, you know? So, it's just, to me, that was a turning point for that character. And, the film is really based around the idea of singularities, like singular moments, turning points, flashpoints in history. And so that's a personal turning point for this character.
Yeah, yeah. So sort of talking about when the two characters are sharing these really trauma-informed experiences. I know that the Black lead talks about the murder of Sean Bell when she was a child, and then the Irish lead who talks about the IRA. So I'm wondering, like, have you seen the film The Black and the Green?
No, I have tried to see it and have yet to see it. But I know Donald Foreman, who's another book and filmmakers collective, made a fabulous film called The Image You Missed. And actually, some of the footage from the North is his father's footage that is in his movie. But he had curated a program at Metrograph, um, and he showed that film. But I haven't seen it. No, I mean, you've seen it, so you can explain to our viewers
Oh,
what it's about loosely.
yeah, yeah. It's a whole bunch of like Black people who are in like the civil rights movement, and also some people who are involved with the Black Power movement, and they go overseas to Ireland, and then they're just like hanging out there, and they're meeting with like activists over there, and like one of the people actually remarks he's kind of like cause when he's going for the airport, he's going for like the UK or through England, whatever, and then he's talking to like the people at the airport, and they're like, oh, you're not going there to like rob them up, and he's like, oh, like where I'm from, like that's us. Like it's just very confusing because I think that I think that it's like yeah, it's like there's a conception of whiteness in Ireland, and like that relationship to the British folks that's just like completely, I think yeah, just something that completely does not exist in an American context.
Yeah, I mean the activists in Ireland who were fighting for United Ireland were, I mean, were fighting for all kinds of civil rights. Took huge, huge, huge inspiration from the civil rights movement here in the United States. So they also started these peace marches, and then, of course, like they did here, the peace marches ended in violence. Things started to escalate. So there's a huge connection, and I think part of what I was trying to do there, so Teshi, the black girl, talks about Sean Bell's murder, right? And Ricky Linnae, who plays Teshi, worked together really closely on developing that because we were interested in finding moments of trauma from each of the main characters' childhoods, right? This idea, like, again, we're talking about flashpoints and turning points. Is like, when is the moment as a kid that you realize that things are not the way you think they are? When is the moment where there's a switch that's flipped and the world can never be the same again? It's like for a queer kid when they realize that this heteronormative world is not your world, that everything that is built around that is not you. So Ricky had shared with me the story. She remembered Sean Bell's murder. She grew up in that part of New York City, and she remembered his murder. This was a young black man who was murdered by police on his wedding day, and the cops, needless to say, all walked free. But there, so we talked a lot about what that moment for her character would be, and we really talked a lot about like what is it for her to put that trauma on screen, you know, and what does that mean for the film, and how do we convey the enormity of that to the audience. So we kind of came up to this idea that the film should kind of stop at that moment, that the film's business takes now back seat for her business. You know what I mean? Not just as a character, but as a performer and as a human being is in this recording that we're watching. So that's where the film really does stop. It's basically the only time we use like an 85 mm lens. And Ricky, of course, is an extraordinary performer. And yeah, so I think it was so important that was her experience, because it's so great, right? When you're working with actors and you're all so open to the collaboration and you can build these moments together rather than like actors just being handed a script and told to read the lines. It's really different. Yeah.
The two leads they had, I feel like they had such like an amazing chemistry. So I'm wondering, like, did they know each other before? Are they friends of yours, or like, yeah, how did that happen?
No, they didn't know each other at all. I had, and I actually, I knew Ricky through Ashley Denise, who's also a BFC member. And then playwright friend of mine in Dublin, Philip McMahon, put Stephen and I together because Stephen was living in here in New York, working with Taylor Mack, who's this superb kind of queer performer. Um, and but I didn't know Stephen. We're like slightly different in age, so we were like in the same kind of queer underground culture thing in Dublin, but had never really met each other over there. So none of us really knew each other all that well, and Stephen and Ricky didn't know each other at all. So the way I got them to meet was I got them both to show up at the same vintage clothes store in Bushwick. And it's like, okay, you got to be in this place at 4 o'clock on Friday and you've got to find each other in, in this big warehousey kind of. So that was really, really fun because it gave them like a before and after for their friendship as performers. And, so then after that, then I kind of worked with each of them separately to develop their backstory before we got together in the room. I made them playlists with music for each of their characters. And then when they met them like in like a script session, let's say, before we even touched the script, I got them to tell each other what their favorite songs from the playlist are. And we started to develop their interaction and their friendship from the backstory work that we'd done. And only then did we go to the script. So it was the whole process of them getting to know each other in their characters and us all getting to work together as a group. The more prep you can do ahead of time, the better for the actors and for you and for everybody. Especially we're going to be filming on a moving subway that's full of
Oh,
people.
what
you know
yeah, what was that like? Like what was it like? Yeah, how did that whole thing go?
it was so fun. Yeah, yeah, it was great. I mean, the reason it worked so well is because all the actors were so down in their characters. They had rehearsed it so much that they were totally in the zone. Because, like, I think if they hadn't done all that work, it just wouldn't have happened. It's kind of chaotic, but we were a super small crew. Um, we had like a sound guy. My partner Jean was camera. Our friend Joanna from BFC was our first AD. We had a PA. But like the MTA people were great. It's like as long as you're not putting up lights or a tripod, you're not blocking the doors, you're not filming the staff, you're all good to go.
Nice. Okay, yeah, yeah. That's good to know, just in case I ever want to shoot on public transit.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So in terms of them like being on the actual subway, but then also just like all these characters, all these amazing characters that they interact with, like Miss Subway out from the past, as well as the Irish dude whose name I don't know, but was really
Dave, yeah. I think he's just called Irish gay on the train.
okay. Irish on the train, yes. Yeah, yeah. How did you go about creating those characters? I feel like that was yeah. It all felt just so organic. Like I was like, oh,
Good.
you meet people on a train like this too. This makes so much sense.
Right. I mean, that's what it is though, as New Yorkers, like we kind of meet people all the time. And I think a lot of the time we're kind of not talking to each other, but it only takes a tiny thing. It's like you just smile at somebody, and next thing you know, you're talking to them on the train. Ozzy Stewart, who plays Deborah, Miss Subways, she'd been in two films previously with that my partner Jean wrote and directed, and I had worked on both of those. I mean, Ozzy's just fantastic. She's just an amazing person. And the first day I met her, we were in Central Park filming and taking a lunch break, and I just asked her like randomly, like very generic. So how'd you get to New York? She's from Trinidad. She told me these amazing stories about how she'd come up from Trinidad as a dancer in the 70s and she used to go to Paradise Garage and the whole thing. And, I was just like so captivated. And that's kind of, so I wrote the part for her, based on that conversation. And then kind of tapped into just thinking more than working more into the fiction end of it. Like I found the Miss Subways thing online, which is this wacky beauty pageant of sorts that New Yorkers used to enter and vote on. So it's like a little bit less awful than your regular beauty pageant. I just started thinking about her brother and like had the brother, because I was like trying to queer up every scene to some degree. It's like, okay, so I thought of this character, her brother Winston, who doesn't appear in the film because he's dead. And we get the sense that she probably lost him during the AIDS crisis. Um, but the reason she starts talking about Miss Subways is because he wanted to be Miss Subways. Winston wanted to be Miss Subways, but he couldn't at that time, So there's just like these nice subtle pieces of storyline that kind of weave in together to building on what Ozzy had told me. Dave, the gay on a train, is like an old friend of mine. We used to throw nightclubs together. I mean, we've been friends for decades. I just thought it would be hilarious. There's that whole thing where like two people from the same part of the world who are immigrants meet and realize, that moment. It's like, okay, let's have the gayest possible version of that story, with these two guys. And then Sergio Acevedo, I just found through casting, he plays Leo, who's kind of the guy who's on the phone, talking about a fight he nearly got into. What Sergio and I talked about a lot with that role was that we wanted to present the audience with a character that is like traditionally thought of in a certain way by people. So he's like a young man of color who has had a past experience with the legal system and with the cops. I was like, okay, well, how do we get people into that frame of mind and then totally flip it around, so that we kind of deconstruct that stereotype that's been so drummed into people, And so it was great to work with Sergio with that. Sebony, who's the woman who does the magic numbers, she's like an old friend of mine. She's a writer and a meditation teacher, So it was just lots of people that I know and, so much fun.
So you enjoy working with actors?
Oh, I loved it. Yeah, I'd mostly done docs before. So this was something pretty different, and I think I want to do a lot more of it. I'd made some other narrative experimental films in the past. This is probably the most narrative of all of them, even though it's quite experimental in form, in terms of actually writing lines and rehearsing them with the actors and all that kind of thing. But I think a lot of my documentary training, if you like, feeds into this, right? Because when you're a documentary filmmaker, one of your greatest assets is being an empathic person, right? And being able to connect to people and to understand people, where they're coming from. And finding a way to let people know that it's okay to trust you, A lot of that feeds right into working with actors, right? Because actors are sensitive creatures,
Yes.
So.
Yeah. How do you feel like your Irish heritage and heritage? How do you feel like your Irish identity informs
My Irishosity?
Yes, informs like the visual language of your films.
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that being Irish impacts the visual language so much. I feel like as I mean, as filmmakers, we're all like image magpies, right? As a young kid, it was actually much more like queer cinema and experimental cinema and art that grab my attention, not specifically Irish thing. Because, coming from Ireland, it's only in the last couple of decades that we've had a really dynamic, vital film industry. We're such a young country and we were still recovering from colonialism. And, there wasn't really an Irish film industry there in the same way that there is now. But thankfully, thanks to state sponsoring of the arts, which of course doesn't happen here in the US, we now have a really, really vibrant scene with tons of really, really talented people who have been given that opportunity to learn and develop their craft thanks to the availability of state funds for the arts.
Yeah. You were telling me that y'all fund experimental film, which is still just so crazy. Yeah, so I'm just wondering,
right?
How does that look?
So the Irish Arts Council is that organization, and they're the people who funded Never Stop the Action and The Red Tree, which you mentioned earlier. And yeah, it's a film fund that's specifically for experimental film, not work that's going to show in a gallery necessarily. That would go under visual art, but they have strands for everything, for theater, for music, all of that. And yeah, and there's money available for that. Yeah. And then there's Screen Ireland, who tend to be bigger budget TV productions, bigger money film, feature films and the like, But yeah, it's amazing. It's really a great thing. That's, I feel, what we need here is talk to artists here in the US, and people are struggling. We're just constantly having to do tons of other freelance work in order just to buy some time, you know. And it's like we were saying earlier, it's like you just don't start making films and be really good at it. It's like trying to make a pot or something. You know what I mean? It's like you're not going to sit down at the wheel and smash it. It's like it takes time, and if you don't have time to do that, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So what has it been like sort of growing as an artist and seeing your career also and oh my God, I'm gonna rephrase this. What I'm trying to say is like what has it been like as you're developing as an artist, also seeing like the film industry in Ireland develop? Like how much has it changed since you were
It's changed a lot. Yeah, I mean, when I was a kid, there was nowhere really officially to study filmmaking in Ireland. Um, so there was like one art college in Dublin, maybe two. So it's changed so much now. Now there's actually like a viable career path for people, and Ireland has also kind of been very proactive in terms of, increasing representation in front and behind the camera, whether it's women or new communities that have moved to Ireland and are now Irish, Afro-Irish communities, etc., that didn't exist when I was younger. So it's really a testament, I think, to the success model of that, where if you invest in the arts, then the arts industry will blossom because you will have tons of qualified people making interesting work.
Yeah, yeah, and then I guess something I always wonder about too is that like as an Irish person, like what is sort of yeah, what is your relationship to, like is there like an Irish American tradition of film here? And like what is that? Like what like yeah, I'm always like, what does that look like? Because I'm like, I know black and the green. I was like Irish people in Ireland, Irish people in America,
Very different.
really different groups. I was like, I don't know what's going on.
I'm kind of really fascinated by that, to be honest, and I'm starting to put ideas together for a project around this. Just this idea of whiteness, specifically as it relates to Irish people. Because I've lived over there, I've lived here, and then just from reading history as well. Like at a certain point, Irish people became white. You know, before that, my people were not considered to be like, they all these ridiculous and dangerous and deadly kind of steps of, you know, the the greasy pole of racism, right? Um, so yeah, the Irish basically, unfortunately, over here in this country, in the US, made themselves more white by being shittier to black people,
Yeah.
you know? So I think there's something really interesting about that. And now there's, Frederick Douglass went to Ireland. Did you know about this? Like,
Oh wow. Okay. Okay. Yeah.
yes,
Ooh.
there's like a whole amazing history here.
When did he go to yeah, what's
Like whenever 1850s, I can't remember exactly. And he was really charmed by the Irish people. He's like, these people are so not racist. These people, I mean, he wasn't talking about the English. And he hung out with Daniel O'Connell, who's called like our liberator. He was an Irish political figure in the 19th century who really fought for Irish people's rights. Yeah, so there's a lot of really more interesting history here, but there's this whole book. Ignatieff is the writer, isn't that his name? How the Irish became white,
wow.
and I think it's really fascinating. Um, and especially even nowadays so when I made a film. I think I told you about this. I made a film called Seaview about asylum seekers living in a former holiday camp in Ireland. These were people who were before when I was a kid in Ireland, it was like monocultural pretty much. Like 99.99% like local native white Irish people. Um, but then in the 90s, a lot of new communities started to move in. So a lot of these folks got thrown into asylum camps for years and years because the government didn't even know what to do with them. It was basically, you can imagine like an asylum center in Coney Island because it was like an old, yeah, totally nuts. But so I'm totally rambling here now. This is obviously a topic it's a very big topic.
Yeah, yeah. It's
So fascinating to me, right? Because I think it's by looking at anomalies that we find our way to deconstruct the whole structure, you know? Because what makes it understandable to people, you know? It's like if you look at an exception or like an incident that was like, that's not fitting with the system, that makes people think, right?
Yeah.
So,
And like I feel like for me I feel like this question of sort of whiteness and like it being all encompassing is always interesting too, because like I grew up on Long Island, and there's a lot of Latino folks here, you know, including white and non-white and black, all sorts of Latino folks, but then also like most of the white people on Long Island I grew up with, and I feel like my town was, you know, pretty racist, or like racist enough. Like, they're most of them are Italian and Irish, and like, and like, it wasn't until I went to college in Atlanta I started meeting like really waspy white people, and I was like, oh, like it's not normal that all the white people are like because there's all these olive skinned white people where I'm from, or like it's just like all these people are just clearly like Irish and Italian.
yeah.
That's not the reality in most of the United States, and it was really interesting to sort of realize that, and then thinking about how like I think Irish people and Italian people in different ways have like a shared history of sort of like climbing up the racial hierarchy ladder by stomping on.
So yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting because Irish people, because we were a colonized country and we were an oppressed people, a lot of Irish people really try to be anti-racist, you know. But there's also, I think, there's like a much bigger middle ground of Irish people who say, "Oh well, we can't be racist because we were beaten up by the British," you know, which of course is not true at all. You know what I mean? It's like I'm sure I would just need to get on the Long Island Railroad and I talked to some people who were Irish. I mean, they all ended up in the police force. You know what I mean? It's like some of the most racist people I've met in this country are Irish cops. You know, so but it's really interesting.
So as a multidisciplinary artist, like I know you've mentioned like performing in drag when you're in San Francisco, as well as like, you know, your photography and visual work. Like, how do you feel like all these things inform the work that you're currently making?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Good that you know, multidisciplinary artists. I think you know, we're so often kind of fighting with those kind of holes or boxes that people are trying to put us into, you know. And I think yeah, it's for me, you know, like I started really with photography because filmmaking was an option, and actually filmmaking wasn't even a thought that I had. You know, the idea that I could be a filmmaker when I was a kid, which is like not on my radar whatsoever, not for like years. You know, so I think, but a lot of the stuff that I did early on, like photography, I used to do tons of collage work. That's kind of how because I was never really very good at drawing, but I had ideas I wanted to express visually, you know. And I feel like that stuff really plays into my work now. Still, I think, especially with Never Stop the Action, because you've got all these vignettes, these little stories that the characters tell that take us out of their train journey. And I was really sure when I was making this film that I wanted to allow myself to be as absolutely free as possible with each of those sections and just trust that the train narrative, that being the backbone, would keep the movie together and keep it moving for the viewer, which would then allow us to go to anywhere at all. So, you know, we've got like stop motion animation in Nicaragua, you know, we've got high eight footage from the 90s, we've got, you know, a ton of stuff. I think that you don't ever really put away stuff that you've done in the past. It's all still kind of in there somewhere, you know.
Like a
Um,
compost.
what's that?
Like a compost, like all the stuff from the past.
Yeah, exactly. And I think with this film, I was just really open to any of that coming through, you know. Um, yeah, and then the music thing was kind of new for me because I only really got into working more full time as a musician during lockdown, during COVID. You know, we were talking before about the opportunities, despite all the horror, that there were opportunities during the pandemic. Um, you know, in one way that we had time and stillness. At the same time, we were kind of looking at the end of things in a very, very real way. So there's kind of like, well, I have time to do this, but also if I don't do it now, I may never get to do it. So So yeah, I started to really do a lot more music. I mean, I always did music as a kid, but I really found myself that at time, I wasn't able to go out and film, right? So I was like, okay, let me learn how to use this drum machine. So this was kind of new, and in a way, the soundtrack of the film is kind of a collage of lots of different music eras of music that I've been interested in because, again, the variety of the vignettes allows us to go through tons of different styles of music. Um, but yeah, you said earlier was something that I thought was really interesting that the movie itself is kind of like an album.
Yeah,
It's
yeah. It is. So I'm wondering, like, yeah, how did you go about putting together the album?
um. So I guess I had ideas for vignettes first. Um, like one of the early ones that came to me was the story about the two twin sisters in the mountains in Spain.
Is that a real story?
No,
Oh, okay.
it's fiction. And it's our friend Marina from BFC who plays the two twin sisters. So I had all these little ideas for different vignettes, and then the train story, like I said, came through as a way to connect it all together. And then musically, it's like I write a piece of music almost every day. I'll get up in the morning, and the first thing I do when it's really still quiet is like I'll just jam on my. You can't see it here, but there's like a whole ton of weird synthesizer modules and whatever
Your
here.
guitar in the back.
And there's a guitar too. Yes, so the guitar appears in the film a bit, but with it being this kind of on the train movie and talking a lot about relativity and science, I was kind of definitely leaning into the kind of Kraftwerk era of electronic music, like early electronic music, um, as kind of like a touch point, which is the kind of stuff I listen to a lot anyway. So this was a really good excuse to really lean into that. Yeah. But anyway, I had this big library of bits of music. And so then when I'm editing, I'm just grabbing stuff and saying, oh, maybe this works, maybe this works. And it starts to kind of come together then. So there was not much that was, in a way, that was written specifically. Some of the stuff I kind of did post score and say, okay, I actually need something like the part with when we talk about the nuclear bombs and the part where Stephen is, or Casey is talking about losing his friend. There are pieces that I wanted something very specific. Um, but then everything else, I had music that was written for just for the sake of writing it. And I tried stuff out. And what's nice about that is that you get ideas about the edit based on the track that you drop in. And even if that track doesn't end up being the final track, even sometimes that can set off an idea about an image or a way to cut the thing or whatever.
So drawing up the idea of like your film as an album. If your film was a restaurant, like what kind of dishes would they serve?
A restaurant, vegan food.
Vegan?
Yeah, no, I don't eat meat.
Oh, you don't eat meat? Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and I'm pretty much like vegan as well at this stage. So yeah, it would be a cruelty-free restaurant
Okay,
with good music and nice people, and yeah,
wow.
and maybe a dance floor.
Yeah. I'd eat there. That sounds cool. Okay.
What about you? If your one of your movies was a restaurant, what would it be?
Yeah, I think hmm, I think if I think that coconut would be like a smoothie shop. So I don't think that we'd serve food. I think it'd be smoothies and
Like a smoothie shop? It's about a funeral, right?
yeah.
Smoothie shop at the funeral.
Yeah, well, lots of nice fruits. We got we got also coconuts. We gotta have coconuts.
You got to have the coconuts in there.
Um,
That's such a beautiful film. I really love it.
yeah, thank you. I
So moving.
I actually just it just showed in Jamaica for the first time ever, um, yesterday. So
Wow, congrats.
I didn't get to go, but it was nice.
That's great.
Yeah, being able to bring her, being able to bring the film. Yeah. Well, yeah, now I'm like breaking the fourth wall. Coconut's a film about my grandmother, but yeah, and being able to bring her in the film to Jamaica, back to Jamaica was really great. I didn't the person who ran it hasn't really sent me any photos yet, so I haven't seen any photos. One of my friends who's Jamaican who's actually like grew up there went to the screening, so they sent me a photo, but I haven't gotten any more photos than that.
So great. Yeah, it's brilliant when the work kind of returns home in a sense, or it returns to the source of the inspiration or wherever the idea came from initially.
Well, and yeah, and I mean, I had the pleasure of already watching it. Amazing work. Say
Thank
thank
you
you so
so
much
much.
today.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for the chats.
Yeah.